Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to those who are joining us for the first time who weren't here yesterday. It's so nice to see everyone here in this beautiful space this morning. One of the things that I forgot to mention last night, too, about question and answer, we're going to do that. We're going to do questions in about 11:30 or 11:15 or so. But if you want, and it's just very optional, you can write a question down on a piece of paper. And then we'll take a break. We'll take a short break. And you can write those questions down, and then someone will collect those questions somewhere, maybe out in the foyer there, and then get those to me. If you want to ask something, you don't want to, get up to the mic and do anything, because that can be kind of like, embarrassing to do so. But the questions, writing a question down actually helps. It's very helpful because sometimes we have questions that we don't want anyone to link us to. I personally have found that really fun to be linked to the questions. They're really embarrassing and uncomfortable for people in a space. But that's not everyone. Everyone doesn't have the kind of fun that I like to have in public. So any question is valid, acceptable. I don't really care what the question is. You should feel free to ask any question that you want to ask as well. I think sometimes we get very censored in our spaces like this. This can be very formal. This is as formal as I get right here. I'm on the throne, which I appreciate. I believe queens should be on thrones. I just believe that should just be the case. And I came into Tibetan Buddhism particularly because of the pretty colors. I felt like going to a Dharma center, to a Tibetan center, was like going to a pride parade. Sometimes with even more sex than a pride parade. So it's just like this, the aesthetic is really appealing to me, the colorful. But sometimes the color, the openness, the vitality doesn't always match the culture that we're trying to cultivate. The brightness and the vibrancy of the cloths, don't always match the vibrancy and the openness of the community itself. So I want to bridge those two in practice, particularly in my Dharma. Let's be fun, let's be colorful, let's be open, let's be spontaneous, in the same way that we're learning about in these practices. So do whatever you feel you need to do today. Take care of yourself, and do whatever. Leave. I don't. Take it personally at all. I don't take it personally when you're taking care of yourself. I don't believe we should just be in this space hurting ourselves, because, we have to go to the restroom, but that's not okay. Or we have to get up and take a walk, and that's not okay. It's okay to do that. The Buddha, if I can just mention the reference to the Buddha here, the Buddha, whom we actually don't know a lot about, quite frankly. We just kind of make a lot of stuff up. In the same way we do about Jesus. We don't know who Jesus was, but I think Jesus was much more intense than the Gospels would suggest. But maybe the Buddha was too. But we know the Buddha's life, particularly the part of the Buddha's life that I find really important for us right now as contemporary practitioners, is the story around his first attempt at long meditation, and the way that he attempted to bypass the body to obtain enlightenment. So to disembody himself, thinking that that was the path, to disembody himself and to embody himself within the mind. He did that forever and ever. I forget how long, maybe years. And then he came out of that samadhi, and was like, oh, I haven't gotten anywhere. For most of us, getting into samadhi is somewhere we just kind of stop. We're like, oh, I've made it. We get really happy with that. But he was trying to get enlightened. So he came out of the samadhi and was like, oh, Like, I'm just really sick. I'm sick. My body is falling apart. And you may have seen pictures of the emaciated Buddha. It's very, scary. It's like he's a skeleton, you know. And he said, "Oh, maybe this isn't the path. Maybe the path is the union of body and mind." You know, so he wasn't actually the first person to say that, because he did come out of a Hindu culture who was doing asana for thousands of years before them. So people, Hindu practitioners, whatever we call Hinduism is just a colonialist term that the British made up for Hinduism. So the practices within the culture of India and Nepal, perhaps, say tantric maybe, they already knew that. They already knew that you needed the body. That's why asana and the Vedics actually emerged. But then he was like, okay, how can I come into the middle again to practice this profound integration of body and mind, the yoking of body and mind together, which is called yoga. And so then he practiced. That was really, I think, such an important expression of the middle way, that you have to come from the extremes. We talked about this last night, about the extremism that we're experiencing right now, that we're in these extremes of good and bad, right and wrong, man and woman, and this kind of binaryism is really, it perpetuates a lot of violence, because reality isn't binary. We label everything in a binary way, but that's not actually the truth of reality. So when you're hitting extremes, like also political extremes, like radical, far right, whatever we want to call it, and then you start easing into liberals and conservatives or whatever you want to call that. But the path within our communities and the path within spiritual practice is to start coming into the middle. And what was the text that helps us to understand the middle way that we chant all the time in Buddhist cultures? It's a pop quiz. What is that text? What is that sutra? Yeah. Yeah, we are. But like the specific text, what sutra that we all chant? Every Buddhist tradition chants this. Yeah, the Heart Sutra. So the Heart Sutra is an articulation of the middle way. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other form. It's a deductionist text. Nagarjuna, who was the proponent of the middle way. So deduction means that the argument is just take everything away. You keep reducing everything. So the Heart Sutra is a reduction that gets us to the heart of things, There's no I, there's no seeing, there's no ear, there's no hearing, there's no taste, there's nothing to taste, So it keeps getting the rug pulled from under you. And it's confusing and uncomfortable. But that brings us into the middle that says, okay, if there's nothing, then what am I experiencing then? Which is really confusing, and that's it's one of the highest kinds of understandings of Buddhism, that both can be emptiness and materialism can exist together in union. Or nihilism and materialism maybe can exist together in one teaching. And it's not for us to think about. It's not for us to contemplate, it's for us to experience. What does it feel to be completely disrupted? To walk through the world and say, I am and I'm not at the same time. And that's where our work has to go into. Is coming into the middle is to integrate those extremist views into one view. And it defies everything that we think is logical. But to sit with that's one of the things that you listen to and you contemplate, and you just let it drop into your body. You don't think about it. Just stop thinking about it. You're not going to get enlightened thinking. You're going to get less enlightened thinking. But when the Buddha came back to his body, he was coming back to experience. He was like, what is the experience of my body? My body is always in the present moment. Always in right now. It's not in the past, it's not in the future. My mind is in the past and in the future. We bring our minds to our bodies, that our bodies can ground our awareness in this moment. And then you talk about emotions, and we talk about anger. Anger, you'll never experience this freedom from anger. And when I say freedom from anger, I don't mean getting rid of anger. I'm not trying to get rid of anger. I'm just trying to have an open relationship with it. But to get to anger, I have to get to my body. I have to love my body. The love of body is our doorway into understanding the roots of all of our emotions, including anger. Our body is always telling the truth. Sensation is just a very clear language. It's, what that sensation is referring to, or what that sensation has been triggered by, that's another story. And for some of us who experience trauma, emotional trauma, physical trauma, we understand that the body can have sensations that have nothing to do with what's going on around us. And that can be misleading. So when I say that the body is always telling the truth, the body is just speaking very clearly. What it's speaking about, who knows? That's a whole nother practice to engage in. So this middle way is really the path for us. It's the path that the Buddha discovered. I mean, he, again, wasn't the first person to do this, but it was important for us to understand. Because we can't live so extreme anymore. So, continuing for today, so I know some of us are new, who weren't here last night. So we just introduced some of this work around anger, and I just have a very basic premise that I'm working with. So the name of the weekend is Liberation Through Love and Rage. Yeah. Because sometimes I call it liberation through anger. Sometimes it's just love and rage. It just depends on. But the title always directs me into where I'm focusing on, actually. It's not arbitrary, But liberation through love and rage centers the relationship of particularly anger and love. That anger is a strategy that holds the space for the anger. We talked about this last night. Holding the space. What does that mean? Holding the space means that we give everything space to be there, even the shit that we don't want to deal with. You say, oh, look at everything. And we can test this out, so even taking a look at your mind right now, just saying, okay, what's there? What am I thinking about? What am I feeling? What am I avoiding? Where's my anger? Where's my sadness? And now can I give everything that's showing up in my mind space? Can I relax? For those of you who come out of the Dzogchen teachings, the Great Perfection teachings, it's like sky gazing. So it's gazing up at the sky, looking at the clouds. You can't touch the clouds. The clouds are moving through the sky. The sky is the mind. The clouds are thoughts, emotions. The clouds are just moving by, you're just watching. You're watching thoughts, emotions, perceptions, storylines pass through the sky of the mind. You're just relaxing, looking at the ways you're attempting to react, the ways that you're hungry to create a storyline. And as you're watching, the mind is supposed to be thinking. The mind is supposed to have all the stuff in it, which is wonderful. So let that stuff be there. We're not concerned with the stuff. In Dharma practice, we're not concerned with the stuff in the mind. We're concerned with our relationship to the stuff. How are you relating? What do you want to do? How do you want to react? What are you trying to grab onto? What do you want to get rid of? What are you ashamed of? All of that stuff is about our relationship, so relax that. Let it go. Just look at it. Yeah, you want to think about something, you want to avoid something, okay. Just watch it. And as you're continuing this, really embracing the profound mantra of okay. You know, like okay. Like I'm sad today. Okay. I'm pissed off. Okay. I don't want to be here. Okay. This is confusing. Okay. I'm really hurt. Okay. I'm happy. Okay. You know, I'm afraid. Okay. I'm dying. Okay. Saying okay isn't condoning anything, nor is it celebrating, or it's not judging anything at all. That's not what okay means. Okay means that I'm allowing this to be there. I'm accepting it. You're there. Okay. I may not like it, or I may even love it. It's fine. It's still okay. Once you accept something, then you move into a transformative relationship with the thing, if you choose to change it. You can't change anything you can't accept. So doing that really basic practice is just looking through the mind and saying, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Maybe as soon as you wake up in the mornings, you're like, oh, okay, this is how I'm feeling. This is where I'm at. That begins the liberation. That's okay is an expression of love, and it's also an expression of liberation. And I can notice everything in my mind and all these experiences, and I can realize, you know what, I'm not special. Like, I'm not unique. I'm like every other person in the world. And then we look at the anger, the energy of anger within our minds. We talked about anger last night, but that the anger of the tension between my hurt and my unwillingness to deal with the hurt. To have a relationship with the hurt. like deep, deep, deep down, unconsciously, we really want to take care of ourselves. We want to be well. We want to be free from suffering, but we don't know how to do that. No one's ever taught me how to take care of myself. You're not trying to get rid of anything. That's not the point. This is not what we're doing. You're just trying to get close. And if you want to be angry and experience anger, that's great, but you need to begin to love the anger and let it transform into something that's actually beneficial for you, not something that's just going to get in the way all the time. Let it help you. Let it help you change the world. Let it help you be in the world in a way that's direct and fierce, but also less violent. So where's the anger in your mind? And what does anger feel like in your mind? And what does anger show up in your body at? Because our emotions, there are two different aspects to our emotions, the mental and the physical. The physical is expressed as sensation. So where's that sensation of anger at? If you find that sensation, try to let go of the mental label, the thought, and just notice the sensation itself. Wherever you are noticing the sensation of anger, it can be anywhere in the body. It can be your whole body. When you notice it, I want you to imagine that that sensation in the body turns into a little white orb, a clear orb of like crystal or something clear. And just imagine that just being in the body. It's very lucid, very transparent. But that energy forms this orb and becomes the essence of anger for you. And once you have that orb, I want you to imagine that that orb leaves the body and comes to rest maybe about 5 or 6 feet in front of you. Just imagining that it's just kind of hovering there. And it's okay if you can't completely imagine it or see it. Just having a feeling that it's there is really important. Now I want you to give permission to this orb, this essence of anger in front of you. I want you to give it permission to transform into something that represents your anger. It could be a kind of being, it could be a person, it could be something that you just, when you think about your anger, this is the image that comes to mind. Whatever you imagine has formed in front of you, whatever it may be, I want you to ask it what it needs. What do you need right now? And so you ask that question and allow space and silence in your mind for the response to emerge. And once you have a sense of what this anger needs, begin to offer it in your mind what is asked for. Now slowing down and taking a pause from sending this anger, what it wants, it needs. And just beginning to send it kindness and love now. You can do that by wishing that it experienced the deepest well-being, happiness, and joy. You can send it energy of loving kindness. And that energy can radiate from your own heart center into the anger, the representation of anger in front of you. Just sending that energy, these aspirations, to this representation of anger in front of you. As you're sending this love and kindness to this representation of anger in front of you, allow this image to transform, to evolve into something else. What does it want to turn into? Just allowing it to change and just noticing that change as you continue to send this energy to it. And so whatever our anger has evolved into, I want you to imagine that it begins to dissolve back into this little white, transparent crystal sphere that we started with, hovering in front of you. And imagine that that sphere begins to dissolve into emptiness. So I want you to now bring your attention to your seat. Just noticing your body on the seat, the weight of your body. If you're sitting in a chair, noticing the floor under your feet. If you're sitting on a cushion, noticing the floor under the seat. Noticing that the floor, the ground under you, represents the earth. And noticing the energy of the earth in this moment. Noticing the energy of stability and firmness. The energy of foundation. The energy of sustainability, of richness, the energy of groundedness, support. Noticing these different aspects of earth energy. I want you to imagine that whatever aspect of this energy resonates with you, I want you to imagine drawing that energy up into your body. Just slowly noticing that energy seeping up through the body. Slowly letting the earth hold you in this moment to give you stability, a foundation. As the earth is holding you, the earth is also at the same time loving you. Your body is an extension of the earth. And the earth is an extension of your body. So as you're being held by the earth, returning your attention to the mind and practicing holding space for everything that is arising for you in this moment. So we'll take a 5-minute break. Try to remain as silent as possible during the break to hold the container for the energy that's been released. And I want in the break, just take care of yourself, do some stretching, do some walking to circulate the energy. And also, if you have a question that you want written down, you have pieces of paper, so go ahead and write those questions down. We'll go into a discussion period after we return.
There's a basket on the table back there, just drop your.
Okay, so I'll ring the bell after 5 minutes, okay? Thank you. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Did anyone write any questions down? We're going to grab them. Okay. So, awesome. Okay. Cool, thank you. So I'll just start with these questions, and if you have a question you want to ask in person, just feel free to do that. So, that's it. So the first question, does the same process you described in dealing with anger apply to all the afflictive emotions of feeling hurt? So the practice that I offer, you can do with anything, any emotion that you feel you're struggling with. This particular practice is really, it's like a Cha-based practice. You all do Cha. I've had some teachings on Cha maybe, and Cha is, we would say, the practice of, there's all kinds of ways to describe Cha. But this practice is really, that I taught is really influenced by Sotram Alion and feeding your demons, and the process that she created, Lama Sotram Alion. Where we actually in the same way we would do it in Chö, but just in a slightly different way. You eject something from your experience and you have a perspective of it, and then you begin to relate to it in a way that feels very nourishing. So you ask yourself, okay, what do you need? It's a very skillful way to get at kind of supporting ourselves and offering ourselves what we need. It's very tantric in that way, where we're using visualizations and energy to kind of facilitate a particular end, a particular result. But sometimes, when we talk about really strong emotions, we just have these habitual patterns around the emotion where we don't actually know how to get to it. We don't know how to sit with it, how to look at it, how to be with it. And many of us have been trained not to deal with it. So, I don't know of anyone that grew up in a situation where, they were being taught how to work with their emotions. They were being trained. We're being educated about emotions. We're really not good, particularly in this kind of Western American cultural context. We're not really good with emotions. We're actually not good with a lot of things. We're good at being violent and dominating. But that's because we've not been taught to work with our emotions. So when people come to me, they're like, oh, anger is so strong, I can't work with it. Well, it's because we've bought into this cultural narrative, that one, anger is really important, and it is, but not in the way that, is liberatory. We're taught anger in a way that's dominating and violent, and we're taught to celebrate that, but we're not taught to relate to anger as something that we can transform to be a vehicle of compassion and kindness. But we're just taught to react to it. We're taught to respond, but we're not taught to experience anger or any emotion. And that was the transformative point for me, particularly when I went into a 3-year retreat, where I had this really transformative moment where I got triggered. I got really pissed off about something, and just because of the container that had been created, and this was, I don't know, maybe a couple of months into retreat, maybe, that I got triggered, and for the first time in my life, I was able to experience anger. And that was like the moment of liberation for me. I was like, oh, this is what anger is. And I felt the whole thing. I felt the physical part, and I felt the labeling. Everything just kind of slowed down, And I think that I got triggered so quickly that I couldn't react to it. I couldn't avoid it. So all of a sudden, I was thrown into the experience. And it was like lightning moving through my body. It actually felt like lightning actually coming from the ground up, moving through my body to the top of my head. It was very bizarre. I felt very shut down and paralyzed. I just felt like I couldn't move. But it was very quick. It was maybe, a second or two? Then after that, I was like, oh, this is like I've never experienced my anger before. Now, all of a sudden, I have this experience. I'm changed. I get it now. But I needed something. I needed evidence. I needed something to say. I needed proof and data to work with. And then after that, I was like, oh, there's this energy here. This is really important energy that I can actually decide. I can use my agency, as we talked about last night. I can use my agency to decide how to channel that. I don't have to go off on anyone. I don't have to kick anyone's ass. I don't have to get passive aggressive. But I can let that energy be there. And I can say, okay, what is the best use of this energy in this moment? How am I going to benefit others right now? Because by experiencing my anger, I'm actually taking care of myself. I'm giving myself what I need. And so when I'm beginning to use my anger, it's not about trying to get what I need in that moment. I've given myself what I need. Then I can center the needs of others around me. But when we're using anger trying to get what we need, then it becomes a different situation, I think. It potentially gets violent. But you can use it for lust. You can use it for sadness. Whatever you're struggling with. It's really important to, later this afternoon, we're going to add Tara into the practice as well. I wanted just to warm up with something. I didn't want to get into Tara quite yet. It's the real deal practice. But, how do we transform, how do we get compassion, into that anger, into that rage, So when we dissipate anger and turn it into love, can we use this practice on certain people we see in the news that we don't love? Yeah. But depending on the level of your practice, that's going to, I wouldn't expect to, like the personification of all evil, I wouldn't quite start with that person. After the election, people were like, particularly Buddhists or, spiritual practitioners of all faiths, actually, people would ask me, I just want to get to the love. I was like, no, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. You need to be pissed off. You actually need to experience being scared and pissed and enraged and afraid and all that, the whole range. We don't want to bypass these important experiences because you don't want to deal with it. You don't want to sit with it. It's uncomfortable. So people are like, I just want to love Donald Trump. I was like, I'm not even trying to do that. I'm not saying I'm better than you. I'm just saying that I'm gonna give myself a break and just experience this. So many of us are conditioned to do this intense caretaking that bypasses what we need in the moment. And trying to forgive people, trying to love people when you're not ready is the act of violence for ourselves. When are you going to take care of yourself? And this is a chapter in the book as well. It's coming out next year. It's forgiveness, because people are so confused about this. They're like, oh, something happens to me, then I should forgive the person who hurt me. I was like, no, absolutely not. When something happens to you, first and foremost, you take care of yourself and not caretake someone else who's hurt you. Because if you try to bypass your caretaking, it's not going to be an authentic apology. Authentic forgiveness, rather. The apology from the person is a whole other thing. But some of us that's how we were raised, to take care of people. We don't want we don't want our perpetrators to feel uncomfortable thinking that we're mad at them. No, they should feel uncomfortable. You're not punishing them, but you're centering your needs, and you have to let people take care of themselves. If someone's uncomfortable because they're anxious about you forgiving them, that's not your problem. That's not your work. So just take it easy when you're trying to do this practice for people. It's we have to consider our basic contemplations, we have to consider what people are struggling with. We have to consider how people are showing up, and I may consider you the personification of evil in all the world. And first, I have to mention that when I label someone evil, I can say, oh yeah, this person is fucking evil. And then my second thought is that, I'm just being really lazy right now. Because this person is really complex. And they're doing really stupid, silly, violent things. Oh yeah, absolutely, I can see that, but maybe they weren't born like that. And we're born with like karmic conditioning. Like we all have genetics. If you want to think about it scientifically, yeah, there's genetics and predispositions, and then there's nature and nurture. That all comes into focus. Then we can explain it karmically, which is very similar. But we don't know how people were born. We don't know the resources they were born into. We don't know the violence they've had to survive. We don't know the amount of love that they received or didn't receive. We don't know those circumstances, you know. So when someone's being really just like intense, you know, that often is an expression of their own suffering, you know, because they don't have what they need. And unfortunately, the more power someone has, the more they're, you know, reacting out of their unmet needs creates issues for the rest of us, you know. And we see that over and over in history, you know, from individuals, from groups, from nations, from, you know, countries. For me, it always comes back to how are we taking care of our suffering, our discomfort. That's important for me. It's important if you're a practitioner, because that's the doorway into compassion, the empathy. You know, I don't have to feel what you're feeling, but I have to have the thought that perhaps you're just not evil for the hell of it. Maybe like you have certain conditions within your upbringing, within your development, and this is the best that you can do given what you have. Now, having considered that, that doesn't mean I just kind of show up and just take your shit. Because I feel sorry for you, because you didn't, you know, you didn't get the love that you needed. You know, a lot of people didn't get the love that they needed, but they found it. You know, but what, you know, when I have that empathy, what it means is also that I have empathy for myself. So I have needs. So my need isn't to be the recipient of your bullshit. Right? So you set boundaries, you know, do whatever you need to do. You act against someone to reduce the harm that they're doing. And that's important for activism. It's like, for me, it's like, I'm not doing this work because like I hate you. I'm doing this work because I love you enough to disrupt the violence that you're, you know, manifesting towards yourself and for the rest of us. And I also love myself enough to want to disrupt that violence and not just accept it. So the energy of anger can fuel that, of course, because you're pissed off, apparently, yeah. That doesn't go away, you're pissed off, but that energy gets fueled into the loving, into the compassion. And it may look the same. You know? It may absolutely look the same. You know, people responding from anger, people responding from love. It looks, you know, I come out of the Catholic worker movement. It was really intense. People were doing really intense stuff. And I was like, oh. But it was so based in love. It was so intense, though. I was like, God, you know, that's even more intense than just being pissed off and just responding to that. It was so direct. You know, everything was so direct and so, like, overwhelming. But the love was so intense. It was like, I love the world enough to do this. Yeah. Yeah, again, you can apply this to any emotion that you're experiencing. You can do this practice. So just going back, do we do this for everyone? Well, you know, just be careful about it. Just do it. Don't do it for, like, again, this personification of evil, but work your way up to this. But I think it's really a good practice to begin with just thinking about, okay, this person, I wonder how this person was raised and where they were born and what they had and didn't have. You know, or you can begin with the person you just, you know, maybe a coworker that you just don't like. You know, lots of people that I don't like. You know, so I always do this with them. It's like, okay, well, you know, I wonder what they're working with. I wonder how they're resourced. What are their resources? You know, do they have friends? Do they have what they need? You know, maybe this difficult person is really just like, they're caretaking other people in their life and they just don't have the energy to give to me to be kind. You know, why do I have to, on my end, why do I have to take everything personally? Like, why can't, you know, particularly if it's not like a big deal, like, so what if someone like doesn't like say hello to me? You know, why is it so personal? Why is it about me? You know? So that's it for these questions. Anyone want to ask a question? And feel free to always do this, you know, at any time. This is really good.
Hey, I'm wondering, in teaching and guiding people about presence and about working with emotions, are there populations that you would be very cautious about working with that particular type of meditation and vision with them?
I think, it really, like, everyone carries a lot of trauma right now, so it's hard to determine that. But like, I think that I often just practice a lot of caution anyway, you know, because I can go much deeper than this. Like, this is kind of very surface, but I'm
kind of thinking specifically of some mental health populations where there is the possibility of psychosis and all of that going.
Oh yeah, and so definitely that. Yeah, definitely being very cautious. If you know you're entering into a space where people are really working with this,
specifically psychosis, probably. Okay.
You want to be really careful. And I do, in that case, like I do a lot of grounding meditation. Like I would do a lot of earth-based, tangible things before moving into anything like that. And even if I do, it's very subtle. It's very basic.
And probably after a lot of feeling things out ahead of time for a long time.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This isn't the practice I started with people, you know, but you have to feel it out. You know, sometimes if I'm in a space, it's like I'm always feeling things out, so everything's always adjusting and changing to meet people where they are.
Very good. Thank you.
And I'll add something else too, but Sergio, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. The practice you led us through, and also just the answers you've been giving, it makes a lot of sense to me when you talk about caring for oneself when one has been harmed. Starting with oneself and caring for oneself, and letting the perpetrator take care of their own business. And it makes a lot of sense to me, and that has been healing, but I'm having a very hard time reconciling that with how I've assimilated the Bodhisattva vow or ideal to be, which seems to be very self-sacrificing. I mean, if you even just kind of read the 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas, and you see a lot of how when even if somebody tries to cut your head off, you give everything to them, or you sacrifice a lot of self. So how can we reconcile those two, or what am I misreading or misunderstanding? How can I try to follow or have the motivation of my Bodhisattva vows at the same time that I'm centering my own needs and my own suffering?
Absolutely. That's a great question. One of the things that we have to be very clear about is that you need a self to give away. Like, you need a clear understanding of ego and self in order to sacrifice, and many of us don't have that to begin with. So many of us are starting, particularly the Bodhisattva work, with fragmented egos. You know, so what compassion, love practices, metta or loving kindness practices, one of the things that they're trying to do is actually put the ego back together. Self-love puts the ego back together. It's like, oh, this is the ego. Once I have it, once I see it, then I can give it away. I can do whatever I want to with it. But you can't do that when you have fragmented ego and fragmented sense of self. You know, so the Bodhisattva vow, you know, Bodhisattva work and literature, really you're starting, particularly in Tibetan culture, what we're not actually explicit, what we're not translating well from culture to culture is that Tibetan culture was starting with a sense of whole ego. for many Westerners, we don't have that. When I say whole ego, I mean that we're actually holding space for all aspects of our identity as well. So we're talking about, for instance, general ideas, like you talk about whiteness. Well, you can't give away your ego. You haven't accepted that yet. You haven't dealt with white supremacy. That's an ego. So you want to do this bodhisattva work, but you're bypassing the ego of white supremacy. And you're not getting anywhere. You're just kind of recreating spaces like this. When you're like, oh, where are the people of color at? Well, we're working with our ego around blackness. And we're not invited to do that in these spaces. So we're absolutely, you give away everything, but you have to start from a place of wholeness. We haven't gotten there yet. We're not a culture that's whole yet. We're not individuals that are whole. Some of us are getting whole. The practices, of course, but as a collective, as a country, we're not whole yet. We have this misconception that we're ready for Buddhism and Tantra. We're actually not. We're like in infancy right now. So we actually don't know what this is going to look like. There's going to be centuries before that happens, But over these centuries, we have a lot of falling apart to do, as well. So that's how I reconcile it. It's like, selflessness is really great, but you haven't accepted the self yet. You've moved straight into giving it away, though. And what are you really doing then? You're giving something away that you don't even own. You haven't even accepted yet. What is that? What's happening then? It's a performance. When people come to me, they're like, oh, I have to be selfless. I was like, no, you need to be selfish. To be a Westerner practicing these things, we actually have to practice a more transformative kind of selfishness first. People occupying privilege, these Dharma teachings sound really good, especially the ultimate. It's like, oh, great. I don't have to deal with my violence. I can justify my privilege through the teachings of karma, which is a slippery slope. The more you simplify karma, the more slippery it gets. It's the easy way out. Like we won't see Dharma really expressing itself until it begins to take root in oppressed communities, not within communities of privilege and supremacy and dominance. That's radical Dharma. Can we get the mic to you? Don't. We're practicing kindness, Fanny. That's another thing. Oh, I forget. Well, that's a whole nother thing too that I work with as well. It's funny that you mentioned that. How we have to. That some of us we sabotage receiving kindness, and that gets us pissed. Like we're pissed off because no one's kind to us, and no one gives us what we need, but we get in the way. But that's just me. When you don't have anything, it's easy to get into this practice of accepting things. It makes sense.
That's an ego too.
Exactly. Why is ego wrong? Like, what is this whole thing about ego being bad? What's happening? Ego isn't bad. It's our relationship to it. We can't keep sidestepping the ego because that's just violence for a lot of us. You talk about people are so down about identity. Oh, identity is so wrong. No. Identity isn't wrong. You have to ask yourself, what is this? Why does this make me uncomfortable? Like that's the thing. I just want us to celebrate ego. We don't celebrate ego. We're not manipulating ego. Our violence comes from manipulating, from using it, from abusing it, which is different than when you celebrate something, you allow it to be whole, and you're like, oh, that's what that is. We're just so young with this right now. And the narratives around ego and self are coming from communities who are really interested in no one examining ego because it calls into question power and dominance. So, as you know, I don't, that's not what I do. I may be sitting on a throne, but this is as much dominance as you're going to get. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Two things. Is there a difference between selfishness and self-caring? Or are those? And the other thing is what about righteous anger?
Okay. So the first question, the difference between selfishness and selflessness, self-care. So self-caring and selfishness. So that's a question of self-indulgence and self-care in my mind, and so self-care is, and I use the writings, the work of Audre Lorde, when she says and writes, self-care, my self-care isn't self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And self-preservation is an act of political warfare. So what that really means is that when I take care of myself and practice self-preservation, then I am disrupting the agenda of systems of power, which are only set up to eradicate people, to dominate people. So when I survive, then I'm frustrating the system. So my teacher once said, we were talking about this, Lama Rinpoche, we were talking about indigenous people, Native Americans. And, Tibetans and Native Americans have a lot in common. Not just like DNA, but like there's certain like beliefs and systems that are really similar. And my teacher was like, Native Americans survived because their magic was so strong. Which I find to be a really powerful statement. Those were his exact words, because their magic was so strong, And the magic gets ritual stuff, but also I just think like the self-preservation was so intense, even under genocide. I consider that to be magic, to those practice of self-preservation. Well, a lot of the work around historical trauma, transhistorical trauma, preservation has come out of like Native American research and Holocaust researchers, two groups of people who experienced, a similar kind of genocide. The experiences of Black people is a different kind of genocide. We weren't trying to be exterminated. We were being enslaved. We were being used. Whereas other populations and communities were trying to be annihilated. So those studies are a little different. You can't compare them side by side, but there are a lot of similarities. But so anyway, going back to that, self-care, self-indulgence, like when I take care of myself, I'm self-preserving. So when I preserve myself, my intention is to return back into being with community. So there's individual care, there's community care, and I want my individual care to link into the collective, to community-based care. That helps it to be an act of political warfare when you're actually sustaining your community through the ways that you're sustaining yourself. So I can't do this practice. I can't, I travel all over the world, I just got back from England like 2 days ago, literally still in England mentally. But, I've been in 5 or 6 countries this year teaching the same stuff, I have more to go this year. But, like for me, it's like I can't do the traveling, I can't do the work, I can't do the teaching if I don't practice self-care. My self-care helps me to lean into this work at the same time leaning into how I'm supporting communities I'm connected to do self-preservation and self-care. So the self-care piece, it looks different for everyone, but it has to be ritualized and systematic for both individuals and for the community. So it means that like you need to do it all the time. You need to do it every day. You need to do something. And my friend Stacy, who I love to death, she runs a collective in London. It's like a spiritual organization. They do yoga and wellness retreats for women of color and Black women. And on her retreats, one of the things she asks the participants is, what is your non-negotiable? Like, what is the thing that you will not negotiate away? In terms of self-care, what's the one thing you do every single day that doesn't get pushed away and prioritized over or under prioritized? It's a hard question for people, but we need a bottom line. We need a foundation. This is what I need to do every day to take care of myself. It can be as simple as that. Making your bed, having a breakfast, taking a walk, having a nap, having a little bit of silence, whatever. It's anything. And I have a whole list of stuff that I do every day because that supports me in being in the world, helps me to continually metabolize and break down all the systematic violence that I experience being in the world. If I don't have the systematized ritual self-care, then I won't be well. And these are the conversations. This is what I do like all the time. Talk about violence and love and anger and sexual misconduct and war and stuff, all the stuff. Am I particularly like, is it fun? No, I wouldn't say it was fun. Is it suffering? No. Is it painful? Not really. Would I rather do something else? Sure. Like, absolutely, but it doesn't mean that like I'm not committed to the work. It just means that like it's, I recognize the difficulty of it, and I'm human, so I want to do something easy. But I don't choose that. But I choose to add care into my life, So that's the difference. So self-indulgence is something I'm doing. I have no intention of like helping communities. I have no intention of coming back and doing anything. I'm just like, just indulging myself because it feels good. That indulgence isn't linked to supporting other people. Like, I'm not doing this so I can like be a better person for other people. I'm just doing it because it's good for me. So I can go to like the spa, wherever that, in the spa, and take vacations or whatever. And I'm like, and people are like, oh, that's so elitist and classist. No, I have, this is what I do to take care of myself, That's a whole other thing you have to let go of. You have to stop comparing what you need to what other people need, especially when you're not taking resources from anyone. You're like, oh, I have to take a nap, but there's so many other people in the world who can't take a nap right now. So in solidarity, I'm not going to take a nap. That's stupid. I had a friend who had a really good job once and was getting like a lot of benefits in healthcare, and and they were really upset. So I was like, oh, why are you upset? This sounds like a great thing. But they were just like, oh, because there were so many people who don't have this, these benefits. I was like, well, you giving up these benefits doesn't mean it goes to someone else. This is not transferable. Like, this is not gonna, like, your company isn't gonna like be like, oh, there's someone else who needs these benefits, so we're just gonna give it to them. That's not how that works. There's so many people who are struggling without resources. But there are resources that if you don't take, they're just going to go to waste. Like, oh, I'm not going to eat this meal because there are people hungry. Well, so they're just going to throw it away. It's like when someone, at the restaurant, someone, I don't know, someone, you misorder or there's a mistake in the order, and, you may be a person who's like, they bring you the food and you're like, oh, this isn't it. But you may ask, but what are you going to do with it? In most places they have to throw it away. Once it's taken to the table, once it hits the table, you can't, reserve it. Then it's like, okay, then like I need to do something. Then maybe some people will just be like, I'll just take it anyway. Who cares? As long as I don't die eating it. Of course, if you're allergic to something, you shouldn't eat it. But sometimes it's just like, yeah, this is going to go to waste. I need to eat this. And it's not exactly what I wanted, but it's not going to kill me. And righteous anger. Yeah, just a quick one. You have a couple of minutes. So, yeah, that's a really interesting one because righteous anger it's extremist, and is riddled with ego, meaning that I'm right. That's why we call it righteous. That means my anger is justified and it's right. And there's also with righteous anger, there's also a connotation of ethics and morality that I have an ethical right. My anger is justified because there's, injustice. And that's fine, but you can't be so attached to that because you may actually be wrong. We talk about the media, all this stuff that's happening in the media, people get really like triggered, especially celebrity stuff. Like, it's kind of a waste of time. Who cares about Taylor Swift? But if you have a teenager, they do. I know I work with all these teenagers, and so sometimes I'll get involved with a celebrity or two, and they're just like, oh my God, I'm just like, I don't really care. They asked me to do something, I did it, and now I'm over. I'm not trying to be their friends. But talk about media, the media tells you what they want you to know. And also on the other hand, media tells you what they know. Is not necessarily the truth. But we get really riled up and I say, I don't know if this is the truth. But I'm really reacting to this. So I bring that up just to say that we respond to things without actually knowing the full story. And so it's like, this is happening. I'm pissed off. I'm right. And we just have to hold space for that and just be like, you know what? I don't know if I'm really responding to the complete truth, but I know that this experience is arising for me, and the information that I have, I have this information, and for me right now, this is the reaction, this is the choices that I'm making, but also I want to be open to receiving more information, more data, and changing. But it's the extremism. And I walk around all the time thinking that I'm right about everything. I'm like radical progressive. Well, I'm right. Like, everyone else is wrong. I'm completely right. But that's not Dharma practice either. So it's like, fuck, I have to be a Dharma person. So then I have to consider other people. I have to consider what's going on for other people and empathize and say, you know what, this person is doing really stupid things. They're making really stupid policies, but what's going on? I may not have to, I don't like it. I don't like perhaps what's going on. I don't like the truth, but I have to be willing to consider it. People are human, particularly politicians are human. They're making these choices, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I get it. So I suppose at the end of the day, and I'll just finish with this, I suppose that what Dharma has taught me is that my perception of the truth is very limited. And that's something that I have to keep coming back to all the time. It's like, I don't have all the data. So how can I have an openness about the ways that I'm judging and criticizing and whatever? That's it. It gives me a little bit of space. But this is the apocalypse again. So, like, the truth can come out really quickly. We can get access to truth. We don't want to deal with it, though. The hardest thing for me sometimes is like we have these experiences, we judge people and we say, oh, they're really evil, then all of a sudden you realize they were always trying to help you. I'm talking like just personal stuff. It's like people who we just felt like they were completely against us, and then they're like, no, they're trying to help you. Like for you Harry Potter fans, who does Harry Potter, so Snape, like the character of Snape, like I know some of you have no idea what this is about, but Snape is this character in the Harry Potter series who you think is just like evil, and he's in deep, like in the evil, but you realize that he's not. He's actually made a vow to protect the good people in the story, and the way that he has to do that is by going undercover, with the villains. And it's like, oh, so interesting. Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, you look at these wrathfuls, like, oh, they're demons, they're monsters. It's like, no, they're not actually. They are, but I'm sorry, they are demons and monsters, literally. But it's just a performance, because they're actually the embodiment of compassion and love. They just sometimes reflect our ugliness. But then when you start developing a relationship to that ugliness, and you're like, oh, that's not so ugly. It's powerful. It's profound. It's intense. And it helps me to reclaim my own agency and my own power when I see images like that. And those images always drew me into this practice. It repelled other people. But I was like, oh, this is like, I get that. Like, this evocative. As Lama Miller used to teach me, as one of my teachers, who some of you may know, it's just very evocative. Like, these images evoke something, and I love that. So that's it. We're going to break for lunch now.